What's up everybody, I'm Jason and I am preempting what I was going to post this week to put up a quick video on the latest firmware for Canon's EOS R5C. Now, I usually don't rush out videos like this because, quite honestly, firmware updates really aren't that interesting, at least most of the time. However, this one gains a new feature that I think most of us will really appreciate, at least those of us that use other Canon hybrid cameras. So with that said, let's just jump in and look at the features on the R5. The new features on the R5C. If we go by Canon's ordering in the release notes, the headline feature is that the size of the focus guide can now be adjusted. There are two sizes, normal and large, and they look like this. Large is definitely bigger and definitely easier to see and use, at least on the smallish rear display of the camera. Now that said, if we're going down this road, I personally would have thought it would have been nice to have had options to independently control the size on the EVF, the LCD, and the HDMI output, or at least the EVF and the LCD. I have certainly had instances where I struggle to see the normal sized guide on the rear LCD. But because the EVF is at infinity focus and it's bigger in my field of view when I'm using it, I have never had that problem when looking through the EVF. Now, the next update on the list is the ability to display markers during playback. So what are markers? Well, these are the center, the aspect ratio, the safe area, and the custom user markers that draw lines, crosses, pluses, boxes, and so forth over the video so that you know where things are. These are now available in the media review mode. Previously, they were only available while recording. Now, while I used the aspect ratio and center markers when recording quite frequently in the past, I have never really felt the need for them in playback. Of course, part of that might be because I don't really play video back on the camera. But that said, now that they're there, it makes perfect sense to me that they should be, and I'm kind of at a loss as to why they weren't. Now, I am going to combine 2 points, that would be 3 and 4, from Canon's release notes into one since they both deal with basically the same thing. With this firmware, Canon has expanded the options that can be assigned to the various dials on the camera. Starting with the select dial. That's the one on the back of the camera that us old photo users would call the quick control dial. It can now control the iris, shutter, ISO and gain, white balance mode, white balance color temperature, and white balance color correction, that's the green magenta shift, as well as perform subject selection when multiple subjects or faces are detected by the AF system. On top of that, the grip control dial, that's the one by the shutter that us old photo people would call the main command dial. The top control dial, that's the one on the top of the camera around the number 7 or mode button. And the lens control ring can now also control the shutter speed in addition to everything that they could previously do as well. That brings me to what I consider the headline feature in this release. Recentering the autofocus point on the R5C in video mode has always been frustrating for me. On all of my other Canon hybrid and photo cameras and DSLRs, I could always just push straight in on the multi-controller or hit the set button. However, until the R5C, Canon cinema cameras didn't actually have an analog to that process. Yes, they had a joystick, but you couldn't press straight in on it. At least I don't think you could. And so the Cinema EOS OS used a different mechanism, pressing the cancel button. Well, Canon has apparently listened to us, and see, everybody says Canon never listens to their users, and they have changed all of this. Well, some of this. Yes, the cancel button still works. If that's what you're used to and that's how you want to go about doing things, feel free to keep using it. However, if you are like me or a lot of other people, you can now just push the joystick straight in or press the set button and the camera will recenter the autofocus point as well. Now, of course, this is only a small change in the grand scheme of things, but it is a big deal if you switch between the R5C and something like the R5 like I do all the time. Now, continuing with the improvements to the user interface, the user interface of the autofocus system, I should say, the continuous autofocus frame's thickness can now be adjusted as well. The options are normal, slightly thick, and thick. Way to go, Canon, for some creative naming there. In short, the thicker the frame, the brighter and more obvious it becomes in the scene. Now again, this does not sound like a big deal, and if you spend all of your time behind the camera, then it probably isn't to you. However, if like me, you end up in front of the camera a lot and use either the flip-out screen or a smallish, like 4 or 5 inch external monitor to see what's going on, then this one is actually another one that is incredibly nice to have. Now, the truth is, I can see the autofocus frame from across the room, at least on my 5-inch Ninja Ultra, when it is set to the normal mode, or where it's always been. However, pushing it up even slightly to the slightly thicker setting makes it so much more obvious and so much easier for me to track what it's doing, where it is, and what's going on, and make sure that the camera is still tracking what I want it to track, without investing a whole lot of extra thought process into it, which, when you're doing a presentation and you're trying to watch the camera and you're worrying about everything else, that's a big deal. So that is the last of the new features, but there are a couple of further updates included with this firmware as well. The first of those is the inclusion of support for lens correction, or the lens correction function found in the EOS Virtual Reality Utility 1.4 and later. Now, I don't shoot virtual reality with my camera, and I don't own any of the VR lenses that Canon has released, so I have no idea what this is exactly. If you do use VR or the VR utility with your R5C, and you do know what this means, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Now, the final minor update or final note in the release notes is the inclusion of various fixes for minor unlisted issues. What they are, I don't know, but they obviously weren't that big of a deal, or they would have been called out. Now, Canon Rumors also suggests that this update also includes the fixes for the EOS R5's March 2024 update. However, I didn't see anything in the actual release notes from Canon to say that. That said, it certainly would make sense to include whatever was relevant from that update as well for the photo mode side of the camera. However, there's enough differences between the firmwares on the two cameras that it might not be relevant. Plus, I don't have a 4 terabyte or even a 2 terabyte CF Express card, so the one feature that I could potentially test easily or care about, I can't test. So, all told, there is nothing overly huge in this firmware update, but the small fixes are definitely nice, and when you stack a lot of small improvements together, you can have a really nice big improvement. So with that said, I hope you found this useful, or at least interesting. If this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. If you'd like to help support this channel, you can help us by liking and sharing this video, or leaving a comment. You can also support us directly by hitting that thanks button, or buying yourself something you've always wanted from one of the affiliate links in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.